Hello, friends, and thank you as always for visiting the Legend Sports Universe YouTube channel. Legend Sports Universe, where legends play forever. This broadcast is the June 1st amateur draft of the first season of the Franchise Stars Baseball League. Again, the Franchise Stars Baseball League setup is a 40-man opening roster taken from a 100-player master pool for each franchise. Those 40 players for the first year were selected via random generator. The remaining 60 players are available to join the franchise through subsequent years through these rookie drafts. Since you cannot edit draft classes in MLB The Show, basically we run the draft, each team picks the fictional players that are created for the rookie draft. What happens then is we take the first 4 of those draftees for each team, and we're going to edit them. From the 60 players remaining who weren't taken initially for the 100-player pool, we will then run the random generator for that position for the remaining guys in the pool. So if a team, for example, takes a second baseman in the rookie draft, we will go to the random generator, go through the second basemen who are in the 100-player overall pool. It's eight guys at each infield position, 20 outfielders, 25 starting pitchers, 15 relievers. 3 were taken for the initial 40-man roster. So the remaining 5 will run the random generator, and it will select which second baseman gets taken in the draft. So it could be your number 1 second baseman, your highest ranked or highest WAR guy in the pool. It could be the 8th ranked guy. So there's a little bit of kind of a luck of the draw aspect to it. Not every draft is going to be perfect. Not every draftee is going to pan out the way you want him to, which is exactly what we're looking for here. The whole idea of the Franchise Stars Baseball League is to bring the best players in history together, but at the same time set it up in a full franchise career environment. The league is intended to have staying power of 20-plus seasons. So that's what we're going to try to achieve here. So that's how the draft is going to be set up. So the way we're going to do this is we're just going to go through each franchise and who they picked. So again, those first 4 rounds, the MLB The Show draft actually tends to go, it's like 7 rounds, and there are some supplemental picks and stuff like that. We're just going to take, for our purposes, the first 5 draftees taken by each franchise. So it'll be the 4 that will be taken from those remaining 60 players in the pool, and then each franchise will also pick 1 Negro Leaguer, which will be picked at the position that is taken in the 5th slot in the rookie draft. And then the remaining couple of players or any extras will be just kind of dumbed down, Joe Random, bottomed out ratings guys, and they will basically have no impact on the league going forward. So we're going to go through this by division, and we are going to start out in the National League East. Check out the draftees from those teams. Let's get into the recap. So we open it up taking a look at the Atlanta Braves. Their big pickup in the rookie draft, Johnny Sane. But there's no room for the inn. No room at the inn for Johnny Sane at this point. The Braves got a terrific rotation draw in their initial 40-man. So their roster is already loaded with Maddox, Spahn, Smoltz, Kid Nichols, and Jim Whitney. Tom Glavine is there as depth at this point. Glavine can't even crack the rotation, so he's stuck in long relief. So Sane, if anything, may give the Braves a little bit of trade depth to try to bolster their offense. Mike Remlinger, a nice guy to add to the bullpen. Gene Oliver and Bill Bruton, are really kind of depth guys, not really impact player. The Negro Leaguer going only by the name of Brooks probably isn't going to have much of an impact down the line either. So the Braves for this draft, Johnny Sane is certainly the impact guy there in an otherwise middling draft. Moving on to the Marlins, this is far from a middling draft. A great draft for the Florida Marlins. who get some depth in the rotation, Sandy Alcantara and Jose Fernandez, who are probably going to go fairly close to the head of that rotation once they join. They also get Gary Sheffield. Sheffield doesn't really need too much of an explanation. 500 homers in his career, coming into this Marlins squad that is currently sending Mark Kotsay out there to patrol right field. Expect Sheffield will have no problem supplanting Mark Kotsay. Logan Hensley is their Negro League pickup, and John Birdie is just a depth guy at third base. Logan Hensley, not a bad pitcher. Led the Negro National League and wins a couple of times. So the Marlins, who it seemed like got a fairly decent pitching draw, they got Josh Johnson, A.J. Burnett, Ricky Nolasco, Anibal Sanchez, but all those guys are kind of hovering in the fours ERA-wise right now for them. So that rotation should get a big boost with this draft. Moving on, we take a look at the New York Mets. The Mets draft keyed by Noah Syndergaard, who will certainly compete for a rotation spot. Pitching has not been the Mets' problem, at least not in the starting rotation, but the Mets' bullpen has been terrible. So you might see an opportunity where one of the solid starters on the Mets ends up getting moved into the pen. Right now, their long relief work of R.A. Dickey and Al Leiter have been fairly brutal in the early going. Expect both of those guys to pick it up, but Syndergaard, cracking this rotation of Seaver, Kuzman, Sid Fernandez, Zach Wheeler, and David Cone might prove a little bit difficult, but certainly Syndergaard a good piece to the puzzle there. Charlie Smith, kind of a nothing player at third base. Ike Davis at first base. The Mets just haven't gotten a really great draw there. Lucas Duda is the incumbent there and will probably stay that way at this point. Duda offers power. His average has been kind of surprisingly high, but that's gonna fall off. Duda at present batting .289. He's not really that kind of a hitter, though. Bobby Jones, a depth starter. Square Moore, Negro League starter. Great name, not a great pitcher, so he doesn't add much to the Mets there. So Syndergaard, certainly the key player for the Mets in this rookie draft. The surprising Montreal Expos are 6 games above 500 here on June 1st of the first year of the Franchise Stars Baseball League. They go with their draft. The big picks there in the outfield, Marquise Grissom and Alfonso Soriano. Grissom is the big one there because Grissom gives them an element that they don't currently have, giving the Expos some speed. I'm not really sure where he plays, though. They already have Andre Dawson, Bryce Harper, Rusty Staub out there. You could theoretically shift Dawson into left field. You could keep Dawson in center. You could play Grissom in left, although I suspect that you would play Grissom in center. Soriano in there gives you an option to put somebody at DH also. Again, none of the guys in this draft will play until next season. This is just kind of what's coming down the pipe for them. Yan Gomes and Matt Adams are role players. Neither one of them figures to see a heck of a lot of action. Newman, the not the Seinfeld character, although he's probably going to be just about as effective. Not a highly rated Negro Leaguer, but Newman is the Negro League representative for the Expos in this draft. But where Grissom and Soriano slot in is going to be the topic to watch for the Expos from this rookie draft. The Philadelphia Phillies draft here, certainly an interesting one. The key pickup for them, 1933 Triple Crown winner Chuck Klein. Klein, obviously a great pickup, but for a Phillies offense that has struggled, offense for them has come from the outfield. They've been very solid out there. Sherry McGee and Richie Ashburn have been good, batting .319 and .298 respectively, and Billy Hamilton has gone on another surge. He was red hot to start the season, cooled off. He's gotten hot again. He's batting .408 now on June 1st, which is actually second in the league behind the Dodgers' Zach Wheat, the only two 400 hitters in the league. But the outfield is where the Phillies' offense is residing. Certainly you could slide one of those guys into a DH spot. Chuck Klein is certainly going to play next year. But it just seems like an odd priority for the Phillies. Turk Farrell and Jack Meyer will help out that bullpen. Negro Leaguer Robert Mitchell, not much impact coming from him. His brother George Mitchell, certainly a significantly better player in the annals of the Negro Leagues. George Mitchell was also selected in this draft. We will get to him later. But the addition of Hall of Famer Chuck Klein, the big one here. The Cincinnati Reds draft is a peculiar one, to say the least. Certainly good pickups in Rob Dibble for the bullpen. Ken Raffensperger will provide some help, probably out of long relief. I'm not really sure he cracks this rotation for the Reds. But the Reds have shown Casey at first base. Casey has been a terrific performer so far, batting .305. He's got 9 home runs. I expect that power will cool off a little bit, but still hitting .305, very solid player. The Reds not only draft a first baseman, they draft 3 of them. Frank McCormick, clearly the head of the class, a former MVP in real life, 9-time All-Star for the Reds. McCormick is an outstanding player. He will probably get the bulk of the playing time at first base, with Casey probably would become a designated hitter against righties, I would assume, or McCormick would DH and Casey would play first. McCormick is certainly going to play. He's a terrific player. But you also got Hal Morris, who isn't better than either McCormick or Casey, and slap-hitting Negro League first baseman Joe Scott, who is just kind of going to be a non-factor here. So just a odd allocation of resources by the Reds, but good pickups nonetheless. That brings us to the St. Louis Cardinals. The Cardinals here do something very necessary for them, getting a legit number 2 to slot in behind ace Bob Gibson. Dizzy Dean will join the Cardinals next season. He will have no need to go building up through the minors. He will immediately slide in behind Gibson. So that will give a nice 1-2 punch to what's been a disappointing Cardinals rotation thus far. We kind of knew that with their draft. They didn't get a great draft. They're all solid starters. Ted Breitenstein, Howie Pollitt, Max Lanier, Jesse Haynes, all solid pitchers, although they have kind of universally underperformed this year with the exception of Breitenstein. But none of them are really the powerhouse number 2 that a top contending team in this kind of league setup needs. Dizzy Dean fixes that issue for them. Walker Cooper, Joe Cunningham, both nice players, but both at positions that the Cardinals are set at, with Johnny Mize at first and Yadier Molina behind the plate. Milt Stock, again, pretty much figures in as a role player here. One to watch, the Negro League pickup of Wade Johnston. Johnston, a diminutive outfielder, but with plenty of pop and patience. He could prove to be a little bit of a sleeper pick and find his way into making an impact on the Cardinals next season. But certainly Dizzy Dean, Bob Gibson will be very happy to see Dean slide in behind him in this rotation next season. I find this draft really interesting for the Cubs. So the Cubs are currently in first place in the NL Central, and the kind of whole has been greater than the sum of the parts, at least in terms of performance. They've got plenty of good, solid players who are performing at a good, solid level, but no real breakout guys other than Stan Hack, who's torn the cover off the ball, batting .354. But the rest of their lineup is kind of sitting in the 270s. They're kind of sitting with 6-7 home runs. They got 20 RBIs. Like it's a very kind of balanced team, and it's going to be interesting to see how any of these guys fit in. Lee Smith joining the bullpen is obviously a great pickup. George Altman, nice little outfielder. Buddy Burbage, what was a batting champion in the Negro Leagues. So those guys can fit in somewhere down the line, with this Cubs outfield. They're not standouts, but they are guys who can contribute, which is what this whole Cubs group has been made up of so far. Javier Baez at short, the very polarizing Javier Baez. Can Baez take over a position that right now is kind of being handled by Charlie Holliker and Bill Dolan? I'm not really sure about that. Can Vic Sayer take over the first base spot from Ray Grimes? Again, Ray Grimes, a nice, solid player who has done a nice, solid job. That's what the Cubs are right now. So it's going to be very interesting to see how any of these guys can slot in with them next year. Obviously, a lot of that will depend on how the rest of this season plays out. Again, as I mentioned earlier, these guys won't be joining the team until next season. But it's good. It's nice to think down the line. And I mean, the Cubs they don't have a ton of their legends. There's no Sandberg. There's no Billy Williams. There's no Ernie Banks yet. There's no Ron Santo. But they're so far they are getting it done. The pitching rotation, the rotation has been solid to this point overall, Russell, Pessoa, Rulback, and the ace, Fergie Jenkins, who actually has the lowest ERA of the group so far. So the Cubs have been one of the more interesting teams to watch here through these first 2 months of the FSBL, and this draft class certainly fits how the Cubs have been to this point. Next, we head out to Milwaukee, and the Milwaukee Brewers, obviously a huge pickup here, getting Paul Molitor. Molitor will bump Tommy Harper off of third base. There's no real question to be asked there. So Harper will end up kind of assuming a utility role, one would assume, for the Brewers. The sleeper pick here, though, Branch Russell, Negro Leaguer, fine hitter, good average, lots of patience, which wasn't always a high commodity in the Negro Leagues. Russell walked a good amount. He is a really, really solid guy, predominantly a right fielder at a position where the Brewers is currently sending Bob Coluccio out there on a regular basis. So Russell should have no problem supplanting him. Cal Eldred, Chase Anderson, both guys who can kind of factor into this Brewers rotation. Brady Clark is kind of filler role player. But Molitor, obviously the huge pickup, and Branch Russell will certainly be somebody to watch for the Brewers when they end up taking the field next year. But seeing Molitor and Yount reunited on that side of the Brewers infield will certainly be a joy for Brewers fans. So much like we said about the Cubs draft, the Pirates draft fits them to a T. They are just top to bottom a good, solid bunch throughout the lineup, throughout the rotation, and this draft fits that. Ginger Beaumont, terrific turn of the century outfielder. Keep an eye on Ed Steele, who is also a batting champion, as Beaumont was. Steele, batting champion in the Negro Leagues. He fits in with the rest of this outfield. You know, Jake Stenzel. Stenzel's average is low, but Stenzel is among the league leaders in stolen bases for the Pirates right now. Fred Clark is batting .316. Starling Marte is batting .303. So those outfielders fit right into that group. Bill Mazeroski shouldn't really be a Hall of Famer. He's really in there for the one home run. But Mazeroski was a terrific defensive second baseman. That will certainly help. You know, the Pirates this season have gotten a surprising output from Rennie Stennett, who's batting .306, but is now on the injured list. But Stennett is probably going to get booted by Mazeroski eventually. Andy Van Slyke, a very solid guy out in center field, gives you a little bit of pop, a bit of speed, solid defense. The Pirates just piecing together a good, solid group. Johnny Morrison, a very nice starting pitcher. Morrison, the current rotation, Ed Morris, Bill Swift, Sam Lever, Bob Friend, and Babe Adams. Morris has been terrific for them. The rest of that rotation is solid. Can Morrison factor into that? Possibly, we'll see, but he'll certainly contribute. We move on to the NL West, and we start by taking a look at the San Francisco Giants. The first place Giants have opened up an 8.5 game lead on the Dodgers. Just a fantastic start for the Giants, whose opening 40-man draw was among the best, if not the best, in the FSBL. Art Devlin and Dave Kozlow, decent enough players, that's fine. Benny Koff, former Federal League batting champion back in the day, certainly a nice pickup in the outfield. Sergio Romo will help the bullpen. The guy I really like here, though, the Negro League pickup, Newt Allen. Allen, an otherworldly defensive player. He could hit a bit too. He was a decent hitter, but defense was his strong suit. He's spectacular. He's been regarded as he played a bit of shortstop too, and he was basically considered by many to be a terrific shortstop who happened to be playing second base. His defensive stats in the context of the Negro League are somewhat off the charts. So Allen's a terrific player. The Giants have depth there. They have Jeff Kent. They have Robbie Thompson, who's a solid player. Is Newt Allen better than Robbie Thompson? Yeah. Does Newt Allen replace Jeff Kent? I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. But can Allen end up getting some time at second, some time at short? he played enough shortstop that he will be rated there. Does he replace Travis Jackson at shortstop possibly? The use of Allen is going to be very interesting to watch. Up next, the LA Dodgers. I like this draft for the Dodgers. It's going to be interesting to see how some of these guys slot in. Thomas Burns, better known as Oyster Burns, which is probably what I should have entered in there. A very fine turn of the century outfielder. Johnny Frederick had a very short but solid career back in, I guess it's the late 20s, early 30s for the old Brooklyn Dodgers. Luis Marquez, the Negro League pickup, can contribute to the outfield. I'm a little bit surprised they went with 3 outfielders. Their outfield right now, Zach Wheat, who leads the league in hitting at .415, he has been unconscious for the last month. Pete Reiser out in right field. Reiser has double-digit homers and stolen bases at this point, batting .329. Yasiel Puig is the guy, even though Puig has been on a power surge. He's got 14 shots, only hitting .255. Puig's probably would be the odd man out, replaced by somebody there. Preacher Rowe and Van Mungo, both very solid starters. Mungo, though, is a guy who in a setting like this doesn't always tend to do well just because of his high walk rate. Mungo was a huge huge walk guy. That kind of pitcher tends to struggle a bit in an all-time setting like this. So he'll be interesting to see how he slots in. The Dodgers, their depth of pitching in their 100-player pool is so big, they're always going to pick up somebody who's solid. Up next, we take a look at the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks draft here, nothing great in terms of the guys they got from their own pool. Chris Young can aid the outfield a bit if he progresses properly. Cody Ransom, Greg Colburn, pretty run-of-the-mill kind of guys there. Brian Anderson, can Brian Anderson replace maybe a Miguel Batista in that D-backs rotation? Possibly. Their big get here was their Negro League pickup, Frank Duncan, an exceptional defensive catcher. He ultimately went on to be a terrific manager in the Negro Leagues as well. One of the most respected guys in Negro League history, too. But Duncan will immediately become the starting catcher in Arizona and try to guide that staff. He's not going to help the lineup too much, but he's so good defensively, he's an immediate plus. Up next, we move on to the San Diego Padres. The Padres, was mentioned before the league started that I thought the Padres probably had the worst draw of any team for their starting 40-man lineup. That has pretty much kind of manifested itself. The Padres 18-37, .327 winning percentage, the second lowest in the league. The only team worse than them has been the Texas Rangers. So the Padres kind of need help everywhere. They're not going to get it from Corey Spangenberg and Randy Reddy. Scott Lindbrink, a nice reliever, that's fine. The Adrian Gonzalez pickup, in theory, is a good one, except first base is the one position that the Padres are doing okay at. Nate Colbert has been terrific there. Jack Clark has been injured, but Jack Clark is predominantly a first baseman. He can play the outfield too. And even Ryan Klesko can play first base also. So the Padres are kind of creating a logjam at one position when they need help in other places. A key here could be the Negro League pickup, Nip Winters. Winters, the winningest pitcher in Eastern Colored League history, the best pitcher in that league's history. He does have some control issues that, as I mentioned with Van Mungo, can be a problem in this league. He wasn't as bad as Mungo in that regard, but he still has some control issues. But Winters could become a really key component of this Padres rotation going forward starting next season. Last and quite probably least, the Colorado Rockies. This is a pretty brutal pickup for the Rockies as far as the draft goes. The Rockies currently sitting at 23-32. They don't really pitch well. They can score a bit. They're not going to get much help out of this draft. Jason Marquis and Jeff Francis, middling guys for the rotation. Marquis was steady, but he's not going to make a real impact. Jeff Francis, a hugely touted prospect who never really panned out in his career. Mike Kingery, a backup outfielder. Albert Walker, a kind of non-impactful Negro leaguer. Steve Reed, I think, has the highest WAR of any reliever in Rockies history. So, he'll help that bullpen, but really not much to speak of here with the Rockies draft, and they certainly needed better than this. So we'll switch over now to the American League, and we'll start off with the Baltimore Orioles. The Orioles, to this point in year one of the FSBL, playing .500 ball. That's not going to be enough to get it done in the American League East, but it's a decent start for the Orioles as a base. They get a pair of first basemen in the draft here, Trey Mancini and Boog Powell, both fine players. They're set at first base with Eddie Murray. Murray on the year, 291, 12 homers, 33 RBIs so far. So finding spots for Mancini or Powell could prove a little bit difficult. Mancini can play the outfield also. That might be where his future is going to be with Baltimore. George Zuverink, nothing major there as a reliever. Floyd Kranson, a decent Negro League pitcher, but no real impactful player there. Vern Stevens, however, is a great get. Mark Belanger has been a pleasant surprise this year. He's fielded as you would expect him to, but he's also hitting .298. You don't really expect Mark Belanger to be able to keep that up for the duration. Vern Stevens probably supplants him next year. That would be my expectation, with Boog Powell likely becoming the eventual designated hitter in Baltimore. Up next, we head to Boston, check out the Red Sox draft. This is an interesting one here. You got a couple of cases. The Red Sox are loaded at outfield right now. They've got Reggie Smith, Mookie Betts, and obviously the splendid splinter Ted Williams out there as their starting outfield. They've just landed Dwight Evans. Ira Flagstad's a decent player, but Dwight Evans is the impact guy there. How does that impact things for the Red Sox next season? It's hard to believe that Evans isn't going to play. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Does somebody become trade bait? Does somebody move? Does somebody take the DH spot? It'll be a very interesting way to see how the Red Sox handle that situation. They also add starting pitcher Carl Mays. Mays figures to bump Bill Monbaquette from what's already a terrific Boston rotation. So Mays would join Pedro Martinez, Cy Young, Dutch Leonard, and John Lester in that Sox rotation. Kevin Youkilis, also a fine pickup. Youkilis can play first or third, so it'll be a matter of how they handle things. Can he supplant Joe Harris at first? Jimmy Collins is the third baseman in Boston right now, so where Youkilis fits in will also be interesting to watch. We move on to the New York Yankees, and the Yankees, as a few teams have here, kind of go the route of something that they feel is a little bit of a weakness, and they go with multiple guys at the same position. Although Gil McDougald has done a terrific job at second base. McDougald batting .326. So he's performed well there, but he's going to lose that job as the Yankees get Joe Gordon and Willie Randolph in the draft here. So the Yankees are going to have an opportunity to possibly trade. It's going to be interesting to see how this league sets up as far as trades being made when they've got good, how teams handle an abundance of depth at similar ages at a position. So again, these guys will all enter at 22. All the current players are 22. They'll be 23 next year. So you've got lots of young talent and creating a little bit of a logjam at a position. That's what the Yankees are going to be dealing with at second base. Paul O'Neill is a depth outfielder. Lou Dials isn't really much of an impact guy as far as the Negro League pickup there. But Whitey Ford, the Red Sox lead all of the FSBL in ERA at this point, which is probably what's really kind of separating them from the Yankees a bit as of now. Whitey Ford kind of balances that out a little bit. The Yankees right now sending out Guidry, Sabathia, Chesbro, Ruffing, and Allie Reynolds. Reynolds has been terrible, but he figures to be a bit better. But he's going to get bumped for Whitey Ford next year. So all of a sudden you're going with Ford and Guidry as your top two, and the Yankees kind of close the pitching gap on the Sox. For the Tampa Bay Rays, their offense has been poor. Their pitching has been atrocious. So the Rays decided in this draft to try to deal with their pitching on both ends, taking relievers and starters. All 5 picks go to pitching for the Rays. They get The top WAR guy in their history at pitcher, David Price, will immediately become the ace of this Rays rotation. Relief-wise, Alex Colome, Jim Messier, J.P. Howell, all guys who figure to contribute a bit to that bullpen, just trying to kind of throw something against the wall and see if it sticks. They've gotten good stuff out of Jason Adams so far. He hasn't allowed a run in 14 1/3. So if you can kind of bolster that bullpen a little bit, that would be a good thing. Again, these guys not taking impact till next year. But back to the rotation, it's not out of the question that their Negro League pickup, Johnny Wright, becomes the number 2 man in this rotation. Wright, a very good pitcher in the Negro National League. He's actually best known as the guy who the Dodgers also signed with Jackie Robinson, and Wright was basically assigned as Robinson's keeper. They were both signed, so technically they both broke the color barrier, just Wright didn't make the majors. He was just kind of there to keep an eye on Robinson and try to make things a bit easier for him. So that's Johnny Wright's place in history. But pitching-wise, he was a very solid, hard thrower, had a good breaking ball, good sinker for the classic, iconic Homestead Grays. So Johnny Wright may well slide in right behind Price atop this Rays rotation. We round out the American League East with the Toronto Blue Jays. A few interesting decisions here. Reed Johnson and Marco Estrada aren't really factors. But will Alejandro Kirk replace Ernie Witt behind the plate next year? That'll be something to watch. Tony Fernandez, probably the most renowned shortstop in franchise history. But Yunel Escobar has been outstanding this year. Escobar, kind of a slap hitter, figured he'd hit around 300, but he's broken through that. He's batting 347 to this point. We'll obviously see whether he can finish the season on that kind of level. You got to figure he'll cool off a bit. But does Tony Fernandez get to replace Escobar, or at least take some time away from him? That'll be worth watching. Also, keep an eye on the Negro League pickup outfielder Clint Thomas. Thomas was a fine player. A 300 hitter with speed and solid defense out in center. He is also historically responsible, or partially responsible at least, for the first, basically the precursor to what eventually became the Negro League Hall of Fame and Museum that is so tied with Buck O'Neil. But Clint Thomas was kind of one of the people behind getting the precursor to that started in a little bit of Negro League history. But a fine player throughout. He's got to figure in to the Blue Jays outfield mix in some fashion next season. Our journey continues with the AL Central and the Chicago White Sox. The Central jam-packed at the moment. That's kind of what that division is figuring to be for several years, I would imagine. Again, we're not going to see a ton of roster movement as far as guys moving off of teams. Everybody's signed to fairly lengthy contracts, etc. So your real changes are going to come through the draft or if trades happen. So the White Sox get some relief help here. Bobby Thigpen, obviously a good get. Eddie Fisher, also a very solid reliever. The big gain, of course, third base, Robin Ventura. Ventura will supplant Joe Crede. Joe Crede currently batting .227, 5 homers, 19 RBIs. So unless something dramatically changes for Joe Crede between now and the end of the season, I would expect Robin Ventura to take over the starting third base job there next year. Negro League pitcher Cheo Hernandez, weird guy. He only had one season, and he was a regular, and he was a very solid pitcher, but there's only one season of him on record. Solid pitcher, though, Cuban pitcher. So we'll see if he fits in at all. But the White Sox rotation has honestly been terrific. Mark Burley has struggled as, again, as I've mentioned previously, pitch to hurlers tend to do in an all-time setting. But I mean, that rotation of Sale, Ted Lyons, Jack McDowell has been very surprisingly good. And Wilbur Wood have all done a really nice job for the White Sox to this point. So we'll see how Cheo Hernandez fits in. We move on to the Detroit Tigers, and the Tigers have, through the first 2 months of the FSBL, been the most disappointing team in the league. They haven't hit, they haven't pitched, they are playing barely over 400 ball, but because this entire division has kind of struggled, somewhat surprisingly, particularly in the cases of the Indians, who we'll get to, and the White Sox, The Tigers only find themselves 5 games out in the division. Nobody's over 500 at the moment. So there is room for them to improve. I'm not sure this draft really does much for them next year, but again, the players in their pool are good. The players on their 40-man are good, but everybody is underperforming with the exception of Mickey Tettleton. Al Kaline is hitting 245. Rudy York is hitting 252. Willie Horton 242. Alan Trammell 258. The pitching has been abysmal for the Tigers. So, like, on the surface, they need everything if you just look at the numbers. But if you know those players, you're going to say this is a roster that should be performing significantly better than it is. Dan Petrie really shouldn't crack this rotation next year with the guys who they already have in it. Norm Cash is certainly a good pickup. Again, Rudy York is over there. York is a fine player, but Norm Cash is certainly going to make an impact on this lineup. The speed of Ron LaFleur is certainly a possible benefit because the Tigers basically have no speed in their lineup at this point. Jose Iglesias isn't much of anything. Jasper Washington, a fairly nondescript Negro leaguer. So Norm Cash probably figures to make the greatest impact with the potential for Ron LaFleur to do so as well, particularly from a speed element. But I'm not really sure. I mean, Barney McCoskey has been solid for them out in center field. They're batting .285 to this point. So we'll see where LaFleur slots in eventually. But watching how Norm Cash is handled between him and Rudy York next year will probably be the biggest thing to watch as far as this draft and how it impacts the Tigers. The greatest need for the Kansas City Royals at this point is a third baseman as they continue to send out Emmanuel Rivera and Joe Foy in just an absolute, just dead wood block out there at third. So they address that here a bit. They take both Mike Moustakas and Kevin Seitzer in the draw. Again, this is a random generator from the players left in the pool who weren't on the initial 40. Obviously, they would have loved to get George Brett. George Brett will still join the Royals somewhere down the line. But Moustakas and Seitzer certainly upgrade the third base position. Current second baseman Mark Rudzelanek probably will have to be fearing for his job a little bit with Whit Merrifield. Esteban German will kind of bounce around, be a backup kind of guy. Jim Haynes, Negro League reliever, nobody of really much significance there. So Jim Haynes will just kind of become depth in the Royals minor leagues probably. But the impact of Moustakas and Seitzer, and to a certain extent Whit Merrifield as well, figure you'll see 3 of these 5 guys making an impact for the Royals next season. It has been staggering how bad the Indians have been considering their draw. I love the Indians roster from their initial 40-man draw. I felt there was a lot of depth. I thought it was well balanced. And just everybody, it's kind of been a Tigers kind of situation where everybody has underperformed, although you are starting to see these guys start to get their act together. Napoleon Lajoie was down around 200. He's now back up to 252 now as of June 1st. Jose Ramirez was mired in the 220s. He's up to 318. Jim Thomey's been terrific. His average is actually surprisingly high. He's batting 325 to go with 16 homers. Manny Ramirez has 9 homers, even though his average is still low. The pitching has struggled, particularly the combination of Sam McDowell and Jim Bagby. McDowell's lack of control has really hindered him so far in the early going. If you look at this Indians draft, this might be the best draft top to bottom that any team got in this rookie draft. Corey Kluber and Addy Joss into the lineup, into the rotation rather. Kenny Lofton out in center field. How they handle him and Larry Doby out there will be interesting. Carlos Santana, obviously a huge pickup as well. So you're going to have some DH possibilities too. Does Lofton move to center, sending Doby to left, Manny Ramirez into the DH hole? That's a possibility, but Carlos Santana's bat can play well as well. So the Indians are going to have some choices to make next year, but it's good choices because they got a lot of depth. All 4 guys who they took from their remaining 60-player pool can have an impact here. Judy Gans, a nondescript Negro League reliever, doesn't really factor to be too much of a player going forward. We will round out the Central with the Minnesota Twins. The Twins have done a good job hanging in so far in this Central Division. Again, everybody is tightly compacted. The whole division within 5 games. Everybody below 500. So it's a matter of seeing who will break out first. The Twins have gotten some really good pitching so far. Santana, Blyleven, and Pasquale have all performed well. Radke and George Mogridge have been solid, if unspectacular. So the Twins decided to look to the lineup here, and their big pickup, Joe Cronin. Cronin figures to oust Roy Smalley from the shortstop position next year. Brian Harper behind the plate. Harper solid, but he'll back up Joe Mauer. The Twins are in good position there. Eddie Rosario can play into this outfield, though, as the Twins' outfield is really weak. Eddie Rosario just kind of fits into what has been, generally speaking, a horrible outfield draw for the Twins, although Larry Heil and John Stone have actually performed decently. So it'll be interesting to see how Rosario plays out. A guy who's starting ratings won't be great, but potential ratings might be decent. So we'll see how he develops in the course of his Twins career. As we get down the home stretch here, we move to our final division recap, the American League West. We start off with the Houston Astros for their draft. Astros, of course, with the big pickup here, Jeff Bagwell will join the Astros next season. That is a huge get for Houston. Glenn Davis so far, 272, 5 homers, 18 RBIs. Decent enough player, but Jeff Bagwell, an all-time great, certainly upgrades that position. Jason Castro will battle Joe Ferguson for a shot behind the plate. Richard Hidalgo can kind of get thrust into the outfield mix, although I'm not really sure if he breaks through there. Luis Valbuena, not much of any significance. George Mitchell, as we mentioned before, his brother Robert Mitchell also taken earlier on. George, the better of those two players. A solid mid-level starting pitcher from the Negro Leagues. We'll see where Mitchell can factor into an Astros staff that so far has been fairly solid. They're good at the top. Roy Oswalt has been outstanding. Ken Johnson has completely outperformed his ratings. Johnson's ERA a tick over 2 so far. Mike Scott and J.R. Richard have both struggled. Richard's lack of control kind of doing him in. So we'll see if George Mitchell can kind of knock on the door of that rotation next year. My guess is he'd probably slot more into depth or a long relief spot. But we'll see how it all plays out. Next, we head to the best team through the first 2 months of the Franchise Stars Baseball League. And this is a case of the rich getting richer. So a rotation that I think top to bottom is the best in the American League, even though the Red Sox have a slightly better ERA to this point. The A's are already sending out there Lefty Grove, Rube Waddell, Tim Hudson, Catfish Hunter, and Jack Quinn. And they are now going to add Eddie Plank to this rotation. So Jack Quinn's time will probably be done next year. They are going to send out Grove, Waddell, Hunter, Hudson, and Plank as their 5-man rotation. That is going to be really, really hard to deal with. Stan Baumgartner and Diego Segui will help out the bullpen a bit. Ozzie Schreckengust at the plate. He may get a little bit of time here or there. Agustin Parpetti, Negro League first baseman, won't ever see the light of day with Jimmy Fox and Mark McGwire, both on the roster already. But the Eddie Plank addition will strike fear into the rest of the American League that this A's rotation is incredibly getting better. Up next, we head out west to the Seattle Mariners. The Mariners, not a great draw here. They really could have used a bit more impact than what they're getting here. Mike Karp, J.P. Crawford, whatever. Arthur Rhodes is certainly a good pickup for the bullpen. That will help the Mariners. The Mariners currently 5 games below 500. They're just kind of middling in everything. They got a decent draw, given the pool that they had to go from. They got Ichiro. They got Ken Griffey Jr. They got Brett Boone. So, they got a decent draw to start. Julio Rodriguez. The pitching has actually held up a bit better so far than I was expecting the rotation to do to this point. Floyd Bannister, Mike Moore, Scott Bankhead, Jim Beattie, Glenn Abbott, all those guys putting together mid-3s to mid-4 ERAs to this point. So the Mariners decided to go into the bullpen instead. Julio Mateo, nothing great there, but Arthur Rhodes will certainly help out the Mariners bullpen going forward. But they really could have used a Felix Hernandez, Mark Langston kind of, front end starter to kind of lead this rotation that right now is comprised of kind of a bunch of number 3s basically trying to make it work. The worst team to this point in the Franchise Stars Baseball League has been the Texas Rangers, and there is not much help coming their way in this draft. If you're a Rangers fan, you've got to be hating this. Andrew Kashner and Roger Pavlik, not really offering you anything there. Leonis Martin, Jeff Russell will help the bullpen. That's a good pickup. But when you're in the situation that the Rangers are in right now, where basically you've got nothing going on either side of the ball. Yes, their bullpen has been atrocious. Joaquin Benoit and Neftali Feliz have gotten lit up. They're underusing Jim Kern somewhat surprisingly. And so Russell will certainly help. But the bullpen is the least of the concerns at this point for the Rangers, given the position that they are in. So this draft really does nothing to give positive thoughts for the Rangers going forward. Finally, we close it out with the California Angels. The Expos have been the biggest surprise in the FSBL. The Angels are second, though. The Angels playing 500 ball. I did not expect that coming. I know they started out with Mike Trout, so that was obviously a huge get for them. But even so, the lineup, I just didn't think they could do anything. I didn't think the pitching would hold up. The pitching has been solid, if unspectacular. Again, that rotation holding in the mid-3s to low 4s. ERA-wise, pretty much across the board. So they're staying in games. The offense getting a jolt. Mike Napoli has been a surprise offensively, hitting over 300. I'm not sure that's going to last, but I would also expect his power numbers to go up as that average comes down. But this draw for them is a good, solid draw. Frank Tanana. Tanana may well become the ace of this staff right off the bat. If he doesn't supplant Andy Messersmith, who'll kind of go in right behind him. And the pickup of Don Baylor is a great get for the Angels, the underrated Don Baylor. You think so much of Don Baylor and the getting hit by pitches and all that kind of stuff. Don Baylor was a terrific ball player, a fantastic offensive player, and he's going to get the chance to supplant Cole Calhoun, who's currently the starting right fielder. Don Baylor will walk in and take that job from Cole Calhoun in a heartbeat. So that's certainly a get. So between Tanana and Baylor, you'd have to consider this a good draw for the California Angels. So that concludes our recap of the first season June draft for the Franchise Stars Baseball League. I kind of blew through it. I didn't want to spend more than like a minute to a minute and a half on each team because, obviously, if we get into super detail on everything, and if I had done this live and been responding to comments while I was doing the broadcast, this would have turned into just an unwieldy 2-hour plus mess, and I didn't want it to do that, and I didn't have time to do that. So I figured I would kind of pre-record this. I'm following along in the comments, as you would have noticed. But I'm hoping that this kind of covered everything in a neat fashion. You can see who's coming on to each franchise going forward. The website has been completely updated. It has all the stats. It's got the standings. It's got each team's stats and leaders, for batters and pitchers. You can look that up. It's got the leaderboards up. It's got a written recap of the first 2 months of the FSBL. So if you haven't followed as of yet and are using this as a jumping on point, first, thank you. And second, check out the website and it will help get you up to speed with everything. Back to broadcasts. Here, Game of the Week resuming as we get rolling in June, heading towards the midway point of the season. I thank you guys, as always, for checking out the Legend Sports universe. Be good to each other, and we'll talk soon.